Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. Now, we have here a very, very unique guest. This man has done over 1,000 missions in conflict zones. This includes areas like Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He is a legit spy, and he has a wealth of other knowledge that I've learned through my research and bringing him on today. Please welcome to Crime and Entertainment, Pete Turner. Pete, how you doing, my friend?
I'm so glad to be on anybody's show at any time. It's always such an honor. But Wade, it's really great to have you invite me, and I just cannot shake these hiccups. And thanks for having me on. It's really exciting to talk.
Hey, man, I'm excited too because, when I first, got to talk with you a little bit, we conversated for a little bit and kind of bounced a few things off each other. And then I started researching you on my own. And, when I think spy, I'm thinking certain things that maybe the movies have me thinking. And it is a little bit of that, but it's a lot of, I guess, almost a little bit of normalcy, but it's mixed in with the stuff that you're just not seeing in every day-to-day life. So we're going to get into that and everything that entails, and then all the other stuff that you're into. Now you have your own podcast. You've had some amazing guests on your own podcast. Been a guest on countless other podcasts, from money management to narcissists to all types of different things. So we'll get into all that. But first, man, I like to kind of start from the beginning, since this is your first time here. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, what your upbringing was like, and then kind of what led you in the steps to go into the service.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a good place to start. I grew up in California, and I had no intention of ever joining the military until after I had a degree. So I was pushing shopping carts in the rain. I couldn't find a job. I'm at Costco, and I'm thinking, I have a college degree. I don't seem to have the ability to find a job, in part because I don't have enough experience, they would say. And so I can go get some experience in the military. And so I did. I joined the military, and I took the tests, and I scored basically off the charts. And he opened the big book and said, any job in here you can have. And so I didn't even know what jobs to get. And my recruiter's like, well, why don't you try this one? The higher the number, the better the job. And what I know about this is I'm not putting anybody in this job, so it must be really good. I don't even understand what it is when I read it, and I'm a recruiter. And so that was how I became a counterintelligence agent.
So a counterintelligence agent. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, from someone that has never served in the military, although, and I do appreciate your service, and any of our fellow men and women that has served in the military, I definitely appreciate your service. But when I hear counter-terrorist, I automatically think CTU 24, Jack Bauer-esque type stuff. Now, I don't know if you watched that TV show. I didn't really get into it till very late. How much of kind of that TV show is related to real life? Is there a lot of threats like that the general public don't know about, that guys like you have to go in and investigate? How true to form is something like that? Obviously, I know it's not quite as, glamorous as that. Technically, I guess that's one day for a whole season that man's going through. Yeah. But are those threats pretty legitimate? And is that kind of where you come in to go in and help legitimize if they are a threat, if it's not a threat? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to say. I've never really watched an episode of 24, but I can tell you this: there are definitely evil people in the world that intend to harm people and to cause an ends to their, to use their means to get to their ends, and that for sure exists. And then what you do as a counterintelligence agent or any kind of counterterror expert is you're trying to prevent that.
Right.
So that means a lot of things, but that's not the only thing I do either. I mean, a counterintelligence agent can do a lot of different things well. My job specifically, sure, there's a lot of people focused on threat, and I can certainly do that and have done that. But I, in general, would look at how are we doing? Are we winning? Are we losing? Mm-hmm. And that could be a lot of things. And so what I realized early in my career during my deployment to Bosnia was that everybody was focused on threat. But when I looked around, there wasn't that much threat to find. And if you did find it, you got lucky, because it's really hard to get the enemy to tell you what they're going to do in advance. So I would focus my efforts and collection on the other things that were obvious. And we had other jobs to do. And it wasn't that I wasn't worried about threat. Of course I was. I was desperate to stop the next attack. But in the meantime, let's find out what else is going on, because look, as you've seen, Bosnia, and that went pretty okay, but that really had nothing to do with us.
Right.
But Iraq and Afghanistan, we largely failed at all of the jobs there. So my job is, how do you change that day to day for a commander so that they can get their job right? So Jack Bauer and I really have nothing really in common, other than when my job is dangerous, it's all the way dangerous. I mean, I've been shot at and blown up and had all kinds of crazy things happen to me. But would you want to watch a TV show about it? I don't know. I mean, if I'm doing my job great, Wade, you don't know I'm doing it. You
Right.
just think I'm goofing around, right? Hey, Pete's having shots with the Iraqis. Should he be doing that? Looks like he's having a party. That means I'm working, and I'm really damn good at it too.
That's amazing. And that is one thing that I've kind of come to realize. Anybody that I talk to that's been in any sort of profession or business, be it, anybody involving drugs or, the adult film industry, whatever, because I cover a lot of different guests here. Most of them have no interest in watching any sort of movie or TV show that relates to that, because one, they can pick up the bullshit and they can spot it. So it's not as entertaining as to someone that don't have that inside knowledge, so to speak, I guess would be the way to word that. And so when you do know that type of thing, like you're going to spend the whole time critiquing it as well, that would never happen. Well, that wouldn't go like that. Well, there's no fucking way that would happen. Something along those lines. So I can see that. But you mentioned Bosnia was the first place you went. Now, what time frame is this we're talking?
96, right after the Dayton Accords, we were part of the first body that moved in. And the thing that was really interesting about that time was it was the first conflict where guys like me led the way. It wasn't going to be won by infantry people because there was no infantry fight. So it was our job to go out to determine, hey, is this fight really over here in Bosnia specifically? And that meant going out every day. And it also was the dawn of the digital age for collections and for military operations. So although they never admit it, all of special operations folks, all of the military arms folks, they were all subordinate to what our little company was doing, because it was our job to figure these things out. And if we had things that we found out, everybody else responded to what we found.
Well, and that's something I want to ask, kind of like, so when you go over there, what is like your typical mission, so to speak? What is your, goal to do when you get over there? What is they say, all right, Pete, we need you to do this? Kind of walk us through, your time over there in Bosnia and what kind of your daily operations were.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, what the heck do I do? How do I find these things out? How do I find out what's I'm not supposed to find out?
Right. So you're basically trying to find out if a threat is existing. Is that kind of okay?
Yeah. But also, look, they'll give you a sheet full of 150 questions, but a lot of these questions are written in a vacuum. It's like, hey, what we want to know. We want to know these things, but most of the good information you don't even have a question for it yet, because it just kind of falls into your lap. Like, who is the most influential person in the valley that you're in? So how do you do? How do you find those people? That's the big question. And how you do it is you really go out and meet a lot of people. We'd leave the camp every day. This is part of those 1,000 combat patrols. We would go out every day in this area where there were mines. There were, as far as we knew, people waiting to start the war again, people not wanting to get caught for the atrocities that they'd done. And we had to go out and talk to folks and get to know the area and become, look, if you're a spy and you're trying to do your job, if they aren't collecting on you and aware that you exist, at least in my world, from how I had to work, then you're not playing the game. You're not on the board. So you got to go out and get known so that people go, oh, that's Pete. Yeah, he always asking questions and we think he's a spy. I want people to think that. I want them to say that. I want them to report that, so that when we do intercept, like on, phone intercepts, that we can hear that. Like, hey, Pete, better watch out. They're looking for you. Yeah, good. They're supposed to be looking for me.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, in Bosnia, I know you said that was kind of not as quite a maybe treacherous times as maybe later on with Afghanistan and stuff like that. Did you run into any danger over there in Bosnia? What was like do you have any close calls? I mean, I know doing what you're doing, you're almost like I guess maybe in a way like undercover type, you're not willing to know exactly what you're doing. So obviously you got to stay on your toes. you got to have your wits about you. You kind of got to have eyes in the back of your head, so to speak. So I know there's had to be some times where some things might have went off the rails and, not maybe went as planned. Do you have anything like that going on in Bosnia?
I mean, that's always the thing. You don't know, right? And when you go out, it's a small detachment. And so we had on our team, we had 3 people with pistols and 2 of us had rifles, right? That's 5 people with guns, and the rest of the country, potentially looking at us. So
that's not very good odds.
Yeah, so the odds are bad, right? So we had to work with the paradigm of, if we got into a shootout, and this is the time before armored vehicles too.
Right.
Matter of fact, it's the time before body armor. We had a thing called a flak jacket, but that was really just to make it harder for flak to enter your body. It wasn't actually ballistic proof. Right. And so you think about all these things and how we're trying to operate. We had to go out into the unknown, which of course is dangerous, especially in the area that there had recently been. They were fresh graves of genocide and atrocities, right? And so you can't take for granted that it's going to be safe. Looking back at it, it was a lot more safe than we had realized, but we had no idea. Nobody knew back then. The threat was high. We were all paid combat pay because it was a dangerous place. You had to go out into it, right? So for Bosnia, it wasn't crazy in that, and then the firefight jumped off, but there was a time where we went to a bar filled with ne'er-do-wells, and our unit really didn't even want us to go. But to find out bad things, you got to talk to bad people. So we went to the bar, and basically our escape plan was, I had a hand grenade in my hand, and I had pulled the pin on it. So if anybody said anything, I had the dead man switch and we could walk out. Now, in reality, it wasn't that dangerous. And so I was able to put the pin back into the grenade, which is not that big of a deal. And, we were able to conduct a regular meeting, because it turned out what we didn't know was that it wasn't that dangerous of a place, at least that day. And I felt confident, and it was my meeting. And I felt confident enough that, hey, I can walk out of this meeting at any time. This isn't going to be a problem. And if it does become a problem, I've still got my stuff here. So it was, but again, keep in mind, completely outnumbered. There must have been 35 people in that place, and a lot of them standing around our table looking at us. So I figured, hey, these guys are interested. They seem happy. You can get a vibe. You don't got to speak the language to get a vibe. These guys are interested in what we're talking about. I'm just going to be a cool dude. I'm going to drink my shots. I'm going to have fun. And we're just going to find out what we can find out about this place. And a lot of these guys probably were bad people at one point, but now they were trying to be good people. And for my job, that was all I really cared about. It's like, hey, these guys aren't that interested in this. Have they turned their weapons in? Well, we'll work on that the next day, but let me just first get to know these people.
So who exactly do they think you are? How does that work? What
I'm honest about it. I'm honest about it. If they ask me, are you a spy? I'm like, yeah, I'm here to ask questions. And if I ask a question that you don't like, then don't answer it. I'm here to keep people safe. You guys, me, everybody else. But I would just be open about it. Because you got to understand, Wade, when they look at me, what do you think they think? What do you think they think about me? They already assume you're a spy, right?
Yeah.
And so even if you're not one, they start with that assumption. So let's just go with that assumption and work from that point. Like, yes, I'm trying to find things out. And if I'm doing my job, again, it's not going to look like I'm doing anything. It's going to look like I'm just having conversations.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty intense. Now, when you mentioned earlier having the pin pulled, now, I don't know a whole lot about grenades, but from what I know, at least from, the little bit that I've seen, you can pull that pin, but there's a hammer on it, correct? So as long as you have that hammer, it's not going to go off. And then, like you said, you could slide that pin back in. But if things got out of line, is your plan to just hold that up with a hammer? So if you get shot, you drop it, it releases, and everybody's about to have a bad day.
Right. Exactly. And although it is dangerous, it is only so dangerous, right? Like one of the things we would do is we would tape that thing it's called a spoon. We would tape the spoon down because we knew we weren't going to use grenades in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. If that was the case for me, I just wouldn't even bring grenades. I'd bring something else instead. But yeah, in that case, I had a grenade. It was like, here it is. I'll have it ready to go. And really, honestly, I didn't feel that like you can hold that thing all day. Believe me, if your life's on the line, you're not going to forget about it.
Right.
But I'm like, this is silly. I want to have my other hand free. And so I reached down while my interpreter was talking, and I just put the pin in. I triple checked. Yep, that pin's in there. And I slowly started to release, and I'm like, okay, we're good, but it really, in the world of combat, that's really not that dangerous.
Right.
Sitting in an Arby's parking lot, that's dangerous as hell. You should never do it. But
Right.
in the world of combat, it's sort of. I've been in firefights where I was equally not in danger, but you're in a firefight. If that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I get you. Yeah, and that's pretty crazy because I would be scared to death that I would just, my head go to itching or something, forget, let off, and go up there and just be panicking, man. That damn thing just went off in my pocket. We fixing to all just have a real bad day at the office.
Yeah. Yeah. You would not want that to happen.
So now you mentioned combat pay. Now, is that a substantial increase in pay? Or what is that looking like there when you guys?
No, it's just a percentage. You get certain allowances for being gone, for being deployed, for whatever it is, and then that's just one of the allowances you get. It's not that much more money. I mean, it's a percentage of your income, but
right.
If you're not making that much money and they give you 10% more money, it's only 10% of not that much money.
Right. Now, I'm a welder by day, and back in the day, probably early 2000s, I know some guys that went over there to do some work over there, and basically when they went, they made a good substantial amount of money. It was not taxed. So I knew some guys that went over there that worked for like 3 years and then come back and just basically bought everything cash money, like bought a house, car, boat, Harley, we're pretty much set after that. Obviously, I guess that's a little bit different because they're working in that zone. They're not actually employed by the military. I think I guess that would be, maybe some sort of contractor or whatever.
Right.
Who was doing that? Was that part of the deal over there too? Do you have people over there working that you're also looking at?
I've actually done that work myself, where I'm contracted to do the spy work, right? And so it depends on the environment, what you're doing, but the military, when it puts out a contract, what it's trying to do is trying to cover the bases on things that it can't do itself because it's busy doing more Army things. So like the firefighters, sure, we have firefighters in the military, but we're just going to put those guys on other tasks that a firefighting company can't do, and then you'll contract firefighters in. So same thing with cooks and carpenters and plumbers, all these trades type people. We're just going to put them to work and then put our cooks to work doing something else.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Now you go to Bosnia. At what point you come back, you decide, is it kind of like a re-enlistment thing? I know, because sometimes when you sign up for like X amount of years, like 4 years. Did you decide to re-enlist? Did you decide, hey, I want to make this a career? Because in a sense, I wouldn't exactly call it podcasting because there's a lot more on the line, but you're having to use your conversation a lot over there. That's a lot of what you're having to do. So you're trying to lead people into conversation, because at the end of the day, regardless of what people are into, what they're doing, it's almost like they have this burning desire to talk about it. And if you can get that out of them, you start to get information. That's in any field, but I imagine especially in yours. Did you kind of, after Bosnia, think this is what I want to do? Let me re-enlist. What was that period of time like?
Yeah, I never really had that thought of re-enlistment. It was something I would consider, but for whatever reason, I wasn't. I don't want to make it sound like I was a bad soldier, but I wasn't very well led, and so in a lot of ways, the Army sort of hates excellence, if you want to say this out loud. And so I would do a lot of things that would make me an excellent soldier, which would get me passed around section to section, but they never really, in my unit at least, cared about me.
Wow.
So I had no real long-term plans. I considered becoming a drill sergeant. I'd be considered becoming an officer and a warrant officer and all kinds of different things, but none of that worked out because it just didn't, for whatever reason. And there were opportunities, and it was like, yeah, let's proceed with this. And then someone didn't do their job, and I didn't proceed with bugging them about not doing their job. And so ultimately what happens is I do my 5 years, and then I get out. But before that, though, it's funny, the Army, again, not that great at what it does sometimes. I met a girl, an Army girl, when I was in Bosnia, and we ended up getting married. And so my next assignment, instead of being in a unit that was going to come right back to Bosnia, which was the original plan, they're like, hey, you have to go with your wife. Her assignment supersedes yours. And so she's going to a place called Fort Huachuca. And I said, well, that's the home of MI, and that's fine. What am I going to do there? And they're like, well, you'll find out when you get there. They're not expecting you because our orders changed literally like 72 hours before we arrived. And so I got there, and where I ended up was working with someone from my old unit had come out. She's like, Pete's an excellent soldier. Finally had a good leader. And she put me in her section, and we taught source operations to experienced counterintelligence agents. And source operations is what I did in Bosnia. That's when you go out and you try to meet someone and find sources of information and put those sources to work trying to answer your questions. So I got to train on the thing that I'd literally just done, and the Army had just re-upped the program. So there were, I don't know, 3 people in the entire Army that were qualified to teach, as qualified as me to teach in this course. And I was the only one who was there doing it. So it was pretty incredible, that experience, to do that. The other thing that my boss said to me, she's like, hey, you're in this trough between cycles of the Army, like career cycles. You're always going to be behind the people in front of you because they're just, it's not that they're better or anything else. Their timing, through no fault of their own, is just better than yours because they got there in a time when they needed a bunch of people. So you're always going to be behind these people. You should get out. And if you want to come back, but come back on your own terms. And so I did get out. And then I came back and I was in the reserves for a while. And then I worked in the contract world for a while. And then I worked as a DOD civilian. And that was my last, part of the Army. So I was with the Army, but not in it. Right. And so, I like to say I worked in, with, and for, right? So I'm working for the Department of Army, sworn in, wearing uniforms, all that stuff was possible for me, but I wasn't under anybody's command because I was this augmentee who could do what needed to be done, which made me an extraordinarily powerful element in the last hunk of my career.
Wow. Now, we talked in the opener, you had over 1,000 missions. I mean, that's a big number. And coming from someone, like I said, again, I've got no real knowledge of that. I had a heart condition that prevented me from joining the service a long time ago. So a lot of my friends from high school did. Thankfully, all of them came back. Some of them did, unfortunately, suffer from PTSD and things like that. But everybody did come back. So I'm limited to what I know about it. So you kind of tell me as best you can, and we'll get into this a little bit deeper kind of after we finish up your military career. But
Sure.
How big of a deal was PTSD around those times? Because was that a thing? Was it not diagnosed as PTSD then? Because dealing with what you're dealing with in situations where you're having a grenade in your pocket, that's going to leave a lasting impression. And I'm sure we've got other stories coming down the pipe later, but that's just the first one. So how big a deal was it then?
Well, no, it wasn't really understood. It was a change of time, right? From Bosnia to Iraq. And then after, we knew that we weren't getting it all right, but we still leaned on, you have to be tougher than whatever the problem was.
Right.
But PTSD is a real thing. And we're finding out, like, what we know now today is significantly ahead. There's all kinds of procedures that people can try to get, and they work for some people, don't work for others. But ultimately, for me at least, because I had worked in this high intensity environment for so long, it wasn't that I was addicted to adrenaline and I wanted to drink Mountain Dews all day, that kind of thing. It was more like my body was programmed to fire off cortisol and adrenaline, because that's what I needed to live, because I needed to be switched on all the time. And so this, you have this almost like mirror-like effect where you're always forward, you're always confident, you're always going for, doing all these things. And then your body no longer does that. And it's also the inappropriate response when you're, in a bank, or ordering food in America. And so you have to kind of rewire yourself. And some people can do it naturally. Some people can just kind of relearn to be normal. That's sort of what I've done. But other people struggle with it because they can't stop. And they've seen far less stuff than I've seen. Far less, far less stuff. So when you have all these things that happen to people and you're trying to understand it, you can't put it all in one big box because we don't all fit in that box. And like a lot of people say, PTS, post-traumatic growth, right? And that's great for people that works for. I've got a disorder. I can't seem to get on top of it. It requires my attention every day. I have to be mindful of my mental well-being, because it gets really dangerous to be me if I don't, right? And that's not something that I can control. I can only manage. And so, PTSD is a big deal, man. And I lost my brother in October, in part to his mental anguish, and he was a veteran. So
wow,
these things happen, and I try my damnedest to try to help people when I'm able.
No, that's been a long time goal of mine since I've started this, to try to get together some sort of fundraiser or something like that to try to help veterans, especially veteran suicide. That happens a lot. And I think there's many places I believe our government's dropped the ball, and that'll be a whole different podcast, but one of them definitely, in my opinion, is helping out the veterans that went over and fought and served this country. I think we can do a whole lot better by them, especially in lieu of, care for things like that, because for someone to go over and make that sacrifice and for it to come over and have that effect on them, we should be able to have something in place to where we can help them out a little bit better. It shouldn't come to them guys having to make that choice.
Yeah, it should. And that's one of the things that I work on. And heck, you don't got to build a fundraiser. You can just work with me. Save the Brave, savethebrave.org.
Save the Brave.
We work on this, trying to give dudes a purpose. And there's a lot of charities that work on this problem. So they all need attention. And if we're not the one you want, then great. But yeah, it requires a lot, because one thing is we're stubborn. I got a couple of cousins that are military dudes, and they need some help, but they refuse to get help because they're stubborn, which is one of the reasons why they're in the military, because they want to do these hard things. And so I bug them as often as I'm able to take this help. But even me, I was in the same boat. I'm like, I'm fine. Someone else is in worse shape than me. Let them go get help, and I'll come back around on the back end. But finally, I got smart and I started getting help, and my life's a whole lot more stable and a whole lot more enjoyable, because I was able to get over that fence. I'm not saying it's easy to do, and if you don't understand it, understand that it's hard to do. It's hard to swallow your pride. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to be weak in any way, and it takes time. You can't quit on somebody. You got to let them do it on their terms, but you've also got to help them in a way that allows you to sleep at night if something terrible happens.
And that's too, that I think that I might think that would be harder for someone to be in those types of environments like you were in, to have to be like the machoest of machos that you can be, but then to come out of that and then admit, hey, I need help, because you have to be this type of person while you're over there in the midst of it in combat. But then when you come back home, you have to say, hey, I need help. So it's almost like counterreactive. And I imagine that would have to, really make it harder. Did you find that it was easier to deal with while you were in the midst of doing what you're doing? You're doing all these tours and these missions, or did it happen kind of after you stop? Because sometimes I've found when people are in the middle of doing things, they might think or know something maybe isn't quite right, but it doesn't kick in until they're not doing that anymore. When they take a break, so to speak, that's when it kicks in. How did that work for you?
It's I was fine until I came back and nobody wanted to employ me to do anything. No, which isn't to say I couldn't find an entry-level job, but why does a guy with 15 plus years working in complicated environments, who has a top secret security clearance, who's got a master's degree and all these things, why would I want to work for a company that thinks I need an entry-level job? It's hard to take that and look at that and say, wait, you want me to start again? But here's a job I know I can do. Like, you won't even talk to me about it. Oh, I get it. Okay, I'm not valuable. I'm invisible. And when you become invisible and invaluable or unvaluable, it's a lethal combination. And for me, it was very dangerous, because all I wanted to do was contribute and help. And I wasn't allowed to have the conversation about what I may or may not be able to do for a company. So I applied for 1,000 jobs and didn't get, but an interview or two out of all those jobs that I applied for. And the interviews that I got were friends getting favors for me, And one of the guys said, you should go back to Afghanistan. And then the other guy said, I can't afford you. And I'm like, you haven't even asked me what I'm worth or what I want, but he's like, I can't afford you. So that's how it goes. And if you aren't allowed to have the dignity of being able to work and earn a decent living for what you know how to do, then that's a lethal combination.
Wow. What you just said was really powerful. You almost were invisible. Your work was done so much under the radar that it was hard to get appreciated and noticed when you got back for what you did. That's really mind blowing. It's crazy and it's mind blowing, because you're doing like some of the most intricate work And then, like you said, when you come back, people are basically, without even asking you what you're at, I guess maybe they're seeing that and they're thinking, oh, this guy's going to want some exorbitant amount of money for what he did, but they're not even asking you what you'll take.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's exactly right. One of the other things too is, in my community, there's a lot of people, but it's a pretty small community. But if you didn't spend a lot of time outside the wire like I did, my career didn't go up. My career kind of stayed at the same level, which made me great at that level. But I also didn't meet this person and meet that person and work for this general and all those other things. So though I was great at my job, I knew more warlords than I do influential people in America. So I could go out, I could work for a warlord, but I'd rather not do that, right? But my peers that had advanced their careers and made the political decisions, and God bless, I'm not saying anything bad about that. They got to do what they got to do. But I didn't go on that path. And they would almost every single person I know would trade to go do what I got to do. I got to go out. Everybody wants to go out. Everybody wants to go do it and prove themselves. And I'll tell you right now, there are very few people in the United States that can go out and do combat like I can. And I can say that confidently because ain't nobody has done what I've done. I mean, it's crazy. There's SEALs that come up to me and we'll talk about our combat experience. And then they'll get like, oh shit, you've actually done more than I have. And I'm like, yeah, man, we've all done enough, right? If you do some, right, you do enough. But when you're out on the ground talking to locals and the locals know you and respect you, that's not something you get to do in headquarters. You don't ever get to do that. You don't get to, you might think you know how to do it, but I promise if I went out with somebody else, they would get in line behind me and watch me work as opposed to the other way around. No matter what rank they were, they would quickly realize that they were outclassed because I got to do the job. I got to become a black belt. Everybody else gets a white belt with a red stripe or something, you know?
Right. That's crazy, man. So when you were working for yourself, you were still doing this type of work. You mentioned earlier that you had actually gotten blown up. Tell us that story of how that led, because we had to get into some of these stories where I know you weren't able to, get away unscathed or unclean. There's always times when things go wrong. Tell us kind of about that story and what led to that and the fallout from that.
Yeah. So it depends on which story, because there's a lot of them, because I've spent a lot of time in combat zones, right? But I'll tell you one right now real quick. So they used to mortar our camp that we were on, and they would, I think, aim for the helicopters because that was kind of the area they always shot at. And we lived, like, if they were from where they shot, we were underneath the munitions as they came in. And then they would kind of walk the munitions up the line towards like the hospital and all that stuff. And so nightly we would get these attacks, and it might happen in the afternoon, it might happen in the evening. You didn't know when it was going to happen, but it was going to happen. And these are mortars, right? And so for the most part, it's no big deal unless you're under the mortar when it goes off. So one of the times my partner and I were driving in our Land Cruiser, and we heard a mortar go off, and we heard the next one. Now, when the first one happened, I get on the gas and I start driving faster, but everybody else is also scattering across the street in front of me on foot. So I can't just start like whacking people with our truck, right? And so as they're clearing out, I'm trying to drive faster and faster. And here comes the third one. And you just know, like we were right in the spot and we couldn't get off the spot fast enough. And so it hit our vehicle. And thankfully, look, in all my time in combat zones, despite being very, very close to things, I mean, so many times I've had bullets whiz by and munitions shot in my general direction. I've never been hit by anything, but our car it blew out a couple windows in our car. It put a piece of metal through our bottle jack. And you know what a bottle jack is, but for the audience, they don't know. Bottle jack's a pretty significant piece of metal. And it put a piece of metal through our bottle jack and made it no longer able to do anything. And so it was a crazy attack. And, our truck had all kinds of marks on it from the bits of the mortar that had blown up. But that's just one time, man. And there must be, I don't know, I don't want to count. There are too many of them. I was running one time, and the Iraqis had launched like an old shell at us, and it was empty. I didn't know that. I just know that as I was running, it went dink, dink, dink down the street. And I was like, oh my God, they just shot a mortar at us, or a mortar, or I don't know, it might have been a rocket, but whatever it was, they had taken the bad stuff out to use it on something else. And it was pretty big. It was like a football sized thing. I can only get a glimpse of it, but it was probably a pretty big shell. And and it bounced on the road down the road because the road was kind of a downhill thing. But you know, it doesn't take much to have your life flash before your eyes. Another time we had a piece of munition land near us and was a dud, but we were certainly in a zone where we would have had a really bad day. I don't know if we would have died from it, but it landed close enough that we could see it and it didn't go off. And
Wow.
and everybody got the hell away from it. And it took them a while to get the bomb squad out there to figure out what to do with it, because as far as they knew, it was going to go off in any moment. That's the other thing. It's like a dud goes off. You're like, whoo, it doesn't mean it's over. You're like, okay, now I slowly have to back away from this, because
Yeah.
it's still a threat until some pro comes along and says it's not a threat anymore.
Yeah, until somebody comes along and says for sure it's either neutralized or
Yeah,
it's
you're waiting for
off.
it to blow up still, right? Yeah, so it's terrifying. So all of those kind of things have happened to me, and it's one of those things where, look, if you ever watch American Sniper, other than getting shot, all of the things that have happened in that movie were things that happened to me.
Wow.
We had anti-tank grenades thrown at our patrols, all kinds of things.
Now you're talking as an American Sniper. That's with Chris Kyle, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, excellent movie. If any of our listeners haven't seen that, I think Bradley Cooper played him. And I remember there was like a really significant part in there where he was basically having to make the choice if he was going to have to take this kid out that was running toward him. And unfortunately, you guys are put in those kind of situations because, the enemy will use whatever they can to get at you, whether it's a kid, whether it's a woman, whether it's a pregnant woman, whatever. So that sort of thing isn't uncommon. Did you run into any sort of those things where you had to make that hard choice? Because that's something that I can't even imagine having to put yourself in, because if you make the wrong choice, it can cost you and your people in your platoon their lives. If you make, the other wrong choice, you're killing somebody innocent, an innocent civilian. So that is the biggest kind of do or die type situation that I can possibly imagine anybody being put in. Did you have any situations like that?
So look, you got to remember too, my job is not to be the trigger puller, right? As much as you always want to be that person on the spot, and I certainly am qualified to do that. If I'm pulling my rifle or pistol out and I'm shooting it back at anybody, then I'm either in support of a combat mission or there's a big problem, because I don't want to have to pull my weapon out, because the next day I've got to go out and do my job again.
Yeah, you've got to do it again.
Right. And if I'm seen as some gunfighter, that compromises my ability to work from my perspective of being like, hey, I'm a guy you can talk to. Right. So, but with that said, yeah, in my world, when you have people come up, one of the things I teach all agents, and it's a really hard lesson because we all want to find sources, and you have to ask yourself, who's playing who, right? Mm-hmm. So you have this incredible sources giving you all this information. Well, who's playing who? Who else is this person talking to? And if you don't know, and it's easy as a young agent to be enamored with the fact that you've got someone talking to you, right? But we had a guy, and we weren't sure what was going on, and we started becoming more and more suspicious of him. And the long story short, we realized that he was either playing both sides or playing a side against us. And so we had to terminate talking with him, and we wanted it to be clear. And so we took him into town, and we released him to go back to home, and basically said, don't ever come back, and that's not an easy decision to make, because I don't know that person lived through that night, but it had to happen because we weren't sure when he was going to do something. And, we couldn't trust that his intentions were what he was portraying them to be. Right. And so you're making a similar decision, a life and death decision. And there's no doubt, Wade, and I can't talk specifically because I don't know, and I wouldn't if I could, but I could say for sure that I've made mistakes and gotten innocent people killed, because war is a messy thing, and you don't get to look back. You don't get a scorecard, but you're making assumptions, and you're trying to put puzzle pieces together, and you don't have enough puzzle pieces, and there are too many puzzles, and it's just too hard to walk out and say reliably, I never got anybody killed. So it's one of the horrible things about war, is that innocent people are forced to stay there. And you think to yourself, why would someone stay in a combat zone? Well, why would anybody want to be a refugee in a foreign country? Or why would anybody want to live in a camp for however many years, lose everything? If this is what they have, of course, a lot of them are going to stay there. Of course, a lot of them don't have the means to even leave. You know, if you leave and you've got nothing, maybe if you got a bank account, you might leave and be like, we've got a bank account, we'll be fine. But if you don't have those things, you're forced to stay, you're forced to live your life, you know, or you see the people around you doing the same thing. And you're like, I'm the one guy that can bake bread around here. Well, I can't leave. These people are going to die if I don't do that. Right. So you have people all around you who are innocent or who are trying to survive. Maybe they're doing things that are extra legal. But, but to us, they seem illegal and he seems like a monster. You know, you can't know all the variables. And so, yeah, innocent people die and it's horrible. That's why war is such a terrible thing. And that's why most of us in the game of being professionals at war, we don't want it to happen. We don't want there to be a war in Ukraine or Russia because it's horrible.
Yeah, it is horrible. We have a friend of the show, Oksana Lada, and she's scheduled to come on, but we're giving her some time because she's actually Ukrainian. She was in the TV series, I don't know if you ever watched it, but Sopranos. Okay. And she was basically the girlfriend of the lead character, Tony Soprano, played by James Gandolfini, for about 4 seasons. And we got hooked up with her through a mutual friend of ours named Cyril DiPaggio, who's filming a movie down in Florida. And she was in that movie. And right time as we were about to get our interview underway is when the invasion happened. Yeah. And she's been posting stuff on Instagram of what's going on over there because she's still got family over there. And it's just absolutely brutal, man, seeing some of the stuff that's going on over there. But I'm going to tell you what, I respect the hell out of them Ukrainians, what they're doing, the way they're fighting. I mean, most people I think by now would have probably given up, but they are fighting their ass off. It's going to be tough because Russia's, you know, they got a lot behind them, but Ukrainians are fighting like hell over there right now.
Yeah, no, yeah, they're doing a great job and they're fighting for the country, and that's something to be praised. And if you're going to have to do something horrible, that would be one of the horrible things that you could look at and go, I understand why you're doing it.
Right. Absolutely. Now, at what point were you at in your military career when 9/11 happened?
I was actually in one of those transitional points where I was in the reserves. They were talking about making me an officer once again and sending me out to the defense language school. And I was going to learn Persian, Farsi. And then they started landing planes into buildings. And so I was like, well, you know, I'm going to have to do something because I'm very good at what I do. And even at the time I was like, I was only experienced. I wasn't a master, but you look around, only so many people that were even experienced as I was, because we haven't been in that much war. Right. Mm-hmm. So I was fortunate to have, you know, this time that I had, and then also worked to teach people how to do sources. So I knew I was going to have to do something. It turned out it wasn't with the military, because the military, again, just couldn't find a way to keep me in. And it wasn't like I set the bar high. I wasn't trying to be the king of France or nothing, but I'm like, hey, here's these things I don't know how to do. Your job is to help me figure them out. The person wouldn't call me back. So I got out, and then I started working on the contractor side about 1.5 years later. But I deployed right after 9/11. I mean, I was in Egypt doing counterintelligence work on like 21 October, you know. So you know, a little more than 6 weeks or so later, not even 6 weeks, I was in the Middle East, and my job was to try to help keep things safe for the soldiers that were going to be in Egypt doing these exercises. Because at that time, we didn't know it was going to happen. I don't know if anybody put boots on the ground faster than us in a large, massive scale like us.
Were you stateside when that happened?
I was stateside. Yeah, I was in Chicago when it happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that day. I was going to college at the time, or a tech school for welding, and I didn't have to be in till late. And I remember I was asleep. I was asleep when the first plane hit, and I got a phone call by my sister, and she woke me up, and she's like, you need to wake up. You know, people are flying planes in the buildings. And my sister's been known to have a cocktail or two, so I wasn't exactly sure what the hell she was talking about.
Yeah.
I remember going to sleep. I went to sleep on a channel that was not normally a news channel, but if you remember that day, pretty much every channel was showing it. It didn't matter if you had it on MTV or what it was showing that. And then almost as soon as I woke up and was trying to figure out what was going on, because all I seen was the first building on fire, I was seeing the second tower get hit. And it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. And then obviously as the events unfolded that day, you find out this was kind of all like a master plan. What was kind of your mission when you signed back up for that? What was kind of your thing? Was it just more or less kind of gathering intel to see what it was? Had they narrowed it down that it was Osama bin Laden behind those attacks at that time, or did that come a little later?
Yeah, all of that stuff was known. You know, the big movement to Iraq had happened, and so like in that second wave, early 2004, I was there. So I was started trained up in '03 and was in theater the early part of 2004. But my job basically was to take the counterintelligence agents that they had just created and season them, you know, do whatever we could to keep them doing their job and take care of all the behind the scenes stuff, because they weren't experienced. They didn't know the right thing. These guys were stubborn because they were green. And so we ended up having to do a lot of stuff that would be in the gray area for sure, because you know they needed so much help and weren't capable of. Look, part of my job that makes it hard is that the Army doesn't know who I am or what I do just by my job. Like
Right.
if I give you a code and it's like mechanic of some kind, it's like, oh, well, I know you do. You're a mechanic. Remember, my recruiter didn't even know what my job was. And so when you show up and you're like, I'm a counterintelligence agent, I'm here to help. Well, here's what I need you to do. It's like, nope, you don't tell me what to do. I'm going to go do my job. I need these resources. And then they're like, well, we're not going to give you those things. And so new agents don't know how to work that part of the game. They don't realize how important it is to blend in with your own community and to do it in a way that gets you the support you need. So that's a lot of what we did was how do we get them networked into their own community, because they don't know what to do, and then just focus them on collection, which is what we did. And we got into some hairy stuff. Let me tell you, it was a dangerous time, but it was sorely needed. And if anything, we probably needed more guys like us there, because those agents were just, look, they went through a shake and bake version of the course. And so when they showed up, they really had no idea what to do or how to do it.
Wow. And from what you've been telling me here, this isn't the type of place you want to send somebody into that's unseasoned, that's not a veteran to the way things operate. Because when you do that, that to me, that would be a recipe for disaster when you put somebody that's untrained, that's unfamiliar with this type of work and type of, you know, situations that can break a lot of people, even people that's been, like you said, somewhat trained. It's different from when you get into the real life thing, when it's full on action, when it's go time. That can make or break a lot of people. I know a lot of people that can train very well, you know, fighting or doing kickboxing or MMA, but if it comes time for an actual fight, that pressure is just too much.
Look, man, I'll give you a really good way to look at this. You're a welder. If I was to take some young kid, you were to take some young kid and teach them how to weld, and they had 2 hours to learn how to do it, you could, in fact, show them how to join metal in 2 hours. But would you ever trust those welds? I mean, they'd be booger welding. They would be overheating everything. They'd have a mile of you know, stick ahead of their, oh my God, they'd be a mess, right? And that's exactly how these guys were. They knew the basics, the very, very, very basics of a highly complex machine. And it's not something that you can leave people alone with. And it's life and death in this game. It's life and death, no joke. I mean, these guys don't know how to not get run, right? They don't know how to ask themselves the questions. They don't know how to make mistakes. They're too afraid to make mistakes, so they think they never make them. Mm-hmm. And that's the worst kind of mistake.
Now, I'm not necessarily a believer of big time conspiracy theories, but I look at all possibilities and all angles. Now, 9/11 is probably one of the biggest things that brought out people that were split down the middle of conspiracy, not conspiracy. There's been countless documentaries. There's been rumors. There's been this, there's been that. There's the 9/11 truthers. I don't think that, you know, you can fake something along the lines of knocking down 2 buildings. Obviously, those buildings were hit. Those buildings fell. A lot of people lost their life. And to me, just trying to say that that's anything different than that is really disrespectful to the people that, you know, lost their lives. However, I do think, and maybe you can shed some light on this, that we may have had some prior knowledge that this was a possibility, and it wasn't maybe looked at 100%, which to go against that, I'm sure they have a lot of fucking information. So it's not like they had this one piece of paper that said, hey, they might hit the World Trade Center and it got lost in a shuffle. I'm sure they've got a million bits of information running around. but I would have to think that was probably at least somewhere on somebody's radar that was a possibility. Can you shed any light on that one way or the other?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, it's not a conspiracy theory at all. We absolutely had intel ahead of time that allowed us to understand that there was a cell operating, at least in this case, out of United States. And I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it's an open thing that you can look up. And the guy who ran the team that found this stuff was my former commander in Bosnia. So he and his crew were working in some side office, probably in the Pentagon somewhere, and they're like, "Hey, this information's going on." But you have to understand that this is a gigantic machine, the military, right?
Mhm.
And you can't collect on American citizens. And so the FBI can't, but not the Army, right? And so when
Right.
you're like, okay, we have this information, and data mining was a new thing. So we have this capability. Are we breaking the law? Yeah, we think we're breaking the law. You can't report on that. So all of these other things limited our ability. And because everything's siloed in the military intelligence community, or in the intelligence community in general, it's very hard to auger through those siloed walls to get that information over. So Eric and his crew absolutely found the 9/11 thing before it was going to happen. They didn't know it was going to be the towers, but they knew that something significant was being planned and set up. And it involved, I think it involved airplanes. And I may be talking out of school here now, but I believe they even knew it was going to involve airplanes.
Mhm.
But and Eric testified in front of Congress because it was that important that we understand this. So for sure, we knew something was coming, but we were not, as a nation, as an organization, capable of getting that information from A. Like, it's not A to B, it's like A to F or A to Z. Like, it's a long path with a lot of
Right.
areas where people are going to say no, right? And so, yeah, even if we did know, it didn't matter because we weren't capable of responding that quickly. And so the laws have changed on that. We've changed how we do this at the expense of freedom, because we don't want this to happen again. So we sacrifice some privacy and some freedom. But
Mhm.
yeah, it was known that this was a threat.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of reports of certain people getting off the plane or not necessarily boarding the plane that they were supposed to board. As I've looked deeper into it, watched countless documentaries and stuff like that, a number of actors were supposed to be on some of those planes, and this wasn't that. It was just really freak accidents. Seth MacFarlane was actually supposed to be on one of those flights, and I want to say his secretary gave him the wrong time to be there, so he missed a flight. Mark Wahlberg, the actor, was supposed to be on one of the flights, and I think I don't know whether he just overslept or what it was. I believe he was supposed to be on the one that was United 93, the one that crashed down in Shanksville, if I'm not mistaken. But it was one of them. I know he was supposed to be on it, and he kind of
Yeah.
caught some flack for that. He was on a TV show, and he was telling that story about it, and he was like, "Well, if I was on there, I would have tried to do something." But the way he
Yeah,
said
sure,
it,
sure.
yeah, it was. People were kind of like, well, this ain't the movies. What could you have done? But at the same time, I feel like everybody now looking back would say, yeah, well, I would have done something. But at that time, you didn't know what they were doing. Like, they were midair. I think the people on the Shanksville flight were starting to get word of what had happened. But, hijackings weren't a common thing in the U.S. at that time. So most of the time when I
Hadn't
thought
been
hijack,
one since DB Cooper
yeah,
in the
that's what
early
I was about to
70s.
say. DB Cooper was like the last hijacking that I remember, and that's all about money. So you
Yeah,
think, well, if
yeah.
these guys are want money, obviously somebody pay them some money. We'll get to it. You never would have thought you're going to be flown into a landmark like that and used to make, a
Right.
statement politically. That would have been the last thing on my mind had I have been on any of those flights and they said they were hijacking it. I would have been like, wow, they're trying to hold us up for, however many hundreds of millions of dollars. I'd have never thought that was going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. It was a crazy day, man. It was a crazy day. And yeah, the times were different then. Yeah, the attitude back then was, um, don't stand up, don't be known, just wait, survive it, we'll negotiate our way out of it. That was really the main thought on hijacked airplanes. And that had worked a lot.
Right.
Because either you got blown up right away, or you sat on a tarmac for days on end until they could negotiate your release.
That's crazy. So where did you, I mean, obviously at this time you said you were still in. At what point did you kind of finish up your career in the military?
Yeah, it was right around 2012. I'd had enough. I was going to take a long break no matter what, and I was always looking for a way to get out because it's just such hard work, and you see the next unit come along, and you're just like shaking your head. Oh my God, it's all over again. We have to start this, And it's just it's so hard to go back again and again and again and watch the same mistakes being made, and watch the same just absolute separation from reality that we as the military have. I'm really hard on us because we should have done a better job. We got a lot of really smart people who managed to not figure it out. So they can all take the critique, but it was hard to look at that. And I was tired of it. And I didn't want to work in the threat world anymore because I had done enough of it. And I'd had a couple of smaller jobs after I left Afghanistan for the last time, but I couldn't take people seriously who were trying to look for threat around every single corner, because that's just not how life works, you know?
Right. The threat isn't always there. Obviously, yes, there is a threat somewhere, but it's not at every step you come across or around every corner and every turn.
Right. Yeah. So there's this whole threat industry in defense, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. So I got away from it in 2012 and fully separated from all of that, and then transitioned over to the podcast side.
Okay. Now, was that your, intention when you come into the podcast? What was your goal when you come into podcasting? You've got a very successful, podcast going for you here. You've got a very diverse group of guests, some really famous guests too, by the way. What was kind of your goal going into it? Did you have a directory, or
it was so new in the podcast game. We really didn't even know. I really didn't even know what a podcast was when John and I said, we're going to do this. And I'm like, yeah, if you think it's the direction we ought to go, let's do it. Because we had to find an avenue to do what we were doing, because we were in a community radio show before that. And there were just a few examples, and they were famous people. And what they did was they said, hey, go to our Amazon link and click on it and buy the book, and everything. And you're like, yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll build an audience up, and presto chango, we'll have a show. And we knew it would be hard because we weren't famous, but we started doing it, and we came out of the gate hitting with some incredible guests. We just, in our network and our charm, we were able to just stand up and go, yeah, we have a really good show, and it's just started. And if I told you all the beginning guests, you'd just be like, how in the world did you do that? But we did it. And so we didn't know what we were doing. Turns out we were good at the interview piece. We're still good at that. The show was great, but I got better and better at booking guests. And until I was like, I can book basically anybody that's willing to talk. And I'm able to get people that I'm like, I have no business getting this person, but my show is so well known now that, when I talk about who's been on the show, the person says, yeah, okay, yeah, great. That sounds good. Let's do it. So it's been a crazy ride. And the Break It Down show, that's my show. Break It Down show has been incredible. It's changed my life. And a lot of my friends these days are friends because of the show. And heck, I'm going to have Jay Moore on my show tomorrow. He became a friend. Here's a famous guy who's been on Saturday Night Live and was in Jerry Maguire and has done so many incredible things. He's a national level comedian touring the nation doing comedy. And he's my friend. And we're going to go sit down like friends. We're going to do my show. The only way you can do that is by getting a little lucky, being ahead of the crowd, being a spy, all those things kind of mixed into creating this show that I have. That's, I'm gobsmacked that I've created this thing.
Yeah. The gift of gab, I'm sure helps, because like you said, you have to broker, that meeting of somebody to come on your show. And in real similar ways, I was originally like, I didn't even listen to podcasts probably 2 years ago. And I started listening to like some wrongful conviction podcasts. Then that led me down some true crime rabbit holes with some of those podcasts. And I was like, I've always found stuff like this really interesting. Plus, I'm like the guy that will watch documentary after documentary about this, that, and the other, all over the map. Doesn't have to be boxed into one genre. And so I was like, I think I'm going to do this. But I didn't want to go straight true crime because there's so many true crime podcasts. It's hard to make your mark, make your dent, get your audience, because to do some of the main cases, it's been well covered so many times. There's only so many Zodiac, podcasts you can listen to before you have all the information. So I went with crime and entertainment to be able to do people that have, committed crimes and had a life of crime, but also turn it around. But then the entertainment aspect of it. And when I first started this, people was like, oh, well, you'll probably quit it after about a week. And that's true. Most podcasts only go for about 5 or 6 weeks. And I'll be honest, there was times I was just like, man, I didn't realize if you care about the product you're putting out there, it takes work.
It does.
Anybody can just hit record and ramble on and then shoot it out. But if you want to put together a good product, and if you want to put out something that people are going to want to hear, then it takes a little time. Even if I was doing an episode on something like my second episode ever was on like the poltergeist curse, where everything bad that happened to the people filming the poltergeist. And, I took a lot of time to write that because there was a lot of bad shit that happened to a lot of people on there. So it took a long time to write it and to put it together. And then I started getting guests. And then, that guest would lead to this guest. And then I would go back and documentaries that I'd seen on TV. There was a guy named Brian O'Day that was a big pot smuggler back in the day. He moved like 75 tons of pot on a fishing boat from like Southeast Asia to Washington or somewhere along in those lines. And I reached out to him. I found him on Instagram and, just sent him a message. I was like, hey, I said, I seen your story like years ago. I said, I have your book. I was like, I'm starting a podcast. I said, I'd love it if you want it. He's like, I'll tell you what, man. He said, if you make a donation to any, society for a recovering addict, wherever you want to go, just make a donation. I'll come on your show. And I'm like, man, you can't beat that. So I done that and got him on the show. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And like one of our biggest guests we've had was an actor, Tom Sizemore. He was in Saving Private Ryan, Heat, Natural Born Killers. And people was like, how the hell? I mean, if someone would go through my phone log right now of some of the names that's in there, they would be totally shocked at some of the people they would see. And, a year ago, I'd be like, there's no way I would know all these people. And I mean, I'm not going to say we're best friends, but the fact that I've had, on-air conversations with Tom Sizemore and private conversations on the phone is surreal. And
podcast acquainted. Yeah.
Podcasting opened up the door for that, much like you're saying. So if it's done right and you put in the work, you can definitely reap the benefits. And it sounds like you're doing it right for sure. Cause you've got a lot of great guests on your show, and you kind of had an interesting way of how you said you went about it. At the end of the day, all you can do is ask. And the worst thing they can do is say no.
Yeah. I mean, if they ignored me, then we're at status quo, right? Like no is at least a response. So, not knowing who I am and not caring, that's the same thing. So I may as well ask. And that's like, it just doesn't matter. Yeah. So you do ask, and having someone like Tom Sizemore, that's incredible. Right. And a lot of these guests, as you know, like these guys are willing to talk, and they turn out they're really interesting people. Tom Sizemore, you can think a lot of bad things about him because of the news and, the troubled life he's led. But then you talk to the dude and you probably have your mind blown. Like he's wise and he's got experience and, he's grown from that time, and maybe he's still a big jerk. Maybe who knows, but you don't know until you have that conversation. And you're right. It is an incredible way to meet people and truly get to know them and really get to know the best about them. I had Floyd Landis on my show. Floyd Landis won the Tour de France for a minute there, and then he got taken away because he was one of the guys in the Lance Armstrong thing. Right. And he has dealt with it. And you hear him talk about it, and you ask him, and the question you want to ask is, would you do it again today? And he's like, yeah, I'd have to. And the timing where I was with my hip being gone, yeah, I'd do it again, because that was where I was in my life and how I had to do it. I'm not proud of it, but it is, that was who I was. And to be able to accept it, it's great. And by the way, the Zodiac, that guy, Eric, I told you about, who found the 9/11 guys, he let me be, I'm the first podcast to break the latest news on Zodiac with his crime busting crew. They do cold cases. They're called the Case Breakers. And they made national news. And as they were dropping the story, he and I were going live on my show talking about it, because the Zodiac killer killed people literally not even 2 miles from my house. 2 of the cases happened. Wow. And so I've got a deep connection to the Zodiac. And again, this is a thing where my being a spy, well, one, I got to know Eric because he ran a company of spies, but 2, like, I wasn't afraid to reach out to these guys and be like, hey, you've done interesting things. What have you done? And he's like, let me tell you what I've done. Not only did they figure out who the Zodiac killer was, they also figured out who DB Cooper was. And they also, like, it's like, holy shit, how many times can I have you on my show? Keep coming back, So yeah, it's incredible, man. And
wait a minute now. Who is DB Cooper? Because I have not heard this, and I'm a big into a lot of DB Cooper. Have they nailed down who they think it is, or they know for sure?
They have. And I guess it depends on who you talk to. There's a big industry wrapped around, and again, not a conspiracy theory. There's a big industry wrapped around not knowing who it is, and everybody's theories and everybody's crime shows and all that kind of stuff. But there was a guy named Rackstraw who was one of the big suspects, and he is the guy that did it. And Eric even showed his analysis to Rackstraw, and he couldn't admit to it, But he, in his own way, is like, yeah, I haven't seen these names in a long time. Oh, look at that. You actually got that connection right. Oh, my, you know what? And so he was like approving the work that they had done.
What was his
And
first name?
Rackstraw. Is it?
I remember hearing that name though. I want to say,
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head right now. I want to say it's like Richard Rackstraw or something like that, but I don't think that's it. But if you type in Rackstraw and DB Cooper, it'll come right up. But yeah, he lived in San Diego. And here's the thing. Here's
Robert Rackstraw.
Robert Rackstraw. The reason why he was able to do this was he was an operator for CIA. And when you need a mangy wildcat that can do things like jump out of a 707 and survive, or fly helicopters, you know, all these other kind of things, those guys aren't always, you know, the savoriest of characters, right? These are guys that are looking to get by and everything. And the CIA doesn't need you every day of the week. They don't, certainly not going to employ you all the time. And so you go out and you do things like hijack airplanes. And then when the FBI goes to drop cuffs on you, the CIA is like, can't touch that guy. He's our guy. Right. And it's just true. And so it's he's a guy who dealt in Krugerrands, gold Krugerrands. You know, that was like the Bitcoin of the 70s. You wanted to pay this guy, you had to bring gold. And because he's like, it's like this, you know, it's one of those things where people are like, no, it wasn't him. Like, all right. Yeah. There's no evidence there. But here's Eric with all of these data points that are being analyzed in a way. You're like, how can it be anybody else? They found part of the parachute, man. They found part of the parachute. What else do you need to know?
Yeah, and they didn't a kid find some money or something that was like on a shore when his family
that was
there
a setup,
camping?
By the way. And
that was a setup.
Of that. That was a
setup. I was wondering like why you only find that one little bit of money.
Yeah, it was a setup. It was all part of the story, and that's in it. So you'll have to. They're working on a documentary now, and I've got a couple episodes on that. So definitely, I'll hook you up with Eric when he's able. He can't always talk about the stuff because there's different TV deals going on.
Right.
I'll hook you up with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm into all that kind of stuff, man. I mean, I follow the Zodiac fears. One of the theories I heard on DB Cooper that I thought was really interesting, and obviously, you know, with this, it can't be true, but it was that the whole flight crew planned that whole thing. There was no DB Cooper.
Right.
And I mean, looking back, that could be like a Usual Suspect type movie. You know,
sure.
they only got this information from the flight attendant. This guy was here, you know, this guy was dressed this way. And then they let all the passengers off. So it's just a flight crew that's got this money on there. And then they fly over. Then they let this, you know, the plane landing gear down so this guy can jump out. Everybody's looking for this guy, and there was no guy.
Yeah.
I mean, looking back, that could definitely be a movie even now, probably. Well, I don't know about now because I know the landing gears is a little bit different. But, you know, that could definitely be a movie that was like a caper all alone by the flight crew.
Yeah, no, for sure. And someone should write that movie because those kind of things are fun for sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the thing with the Break It Down show. I get to talk to incredible people, and my show never ceases to provide opportunity and wealth of great people. It just cranks those things out like crazy.
Yeah. And that's a good thing about doing this, man. I've met some incredible people. I've heard some incredible stories. You know, stories that have the highs, the lows, and the back highs again. And that's ultimately kind of what we like to bring to the show here. You know, people go through ups and downs in life. That is, you know, life. It is what it is. But it's being able to rebound from it, come back, you know, and still regain what you had, or maybe get it, you know, further than what you had before. And that's kind of the message we like to drive home. And, you know, you've got it definitely on your show. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to put your link to your show on our show notes. That way, if they want to go and check some of yours out, because I'm about to go check out some of the DB Cooper stuff you got on there for sure myself. But I mean, we would love to have you back again later on, man, to talk some more stuff. Because like I said, you're a very knowledgeable guy. Anybody that's went the places that you went, done the things that you've done, you have to have stories upon stories upon stories. And I know we had to get a lot of background information on this because I wanted to properly introduce you to the audience, but you know, we could sit back down again later on and do some more in-depth stories. And like I said, it's not just, you know, the spy stuff with you. You've got a lot of knowledge in the podcasting game of, like you said, how to get monetized and how to reach people and stuff like that and other avenues. So is this all stuff that you kind of picked up on the way? Did you have people that schooled you? Did you learn this on the fly? Because I mean, I'll tell you, I knew nothing coming into this. I had never posted a YouTube video in my life. I didn't know what.
It's a combination of all those things. You know how this goes. You're doing it too. Like you learn a little bit of this, you pick up a trick or there, you know, this person says something and some of it works, some of it doesn't. There's all kinds of people that have no idea how to podcast that tell me how to do a better job at my podcast. That for sure happens. But yeah, man, it's a mix of everything. And, you know, just in general, like if you go to my YouTube channel, that's where I want everybody to go. Just go to YouTube, type in Pete A. Turner. And I've got playlists for combat stuff, like Why We Lose. I've got long list of spy episodes where I've had my peers on and we talk about collection and everything, and not just like the standard stuff you could not hear from anybody else. It's really incredible. And yeah, the stuff with Zodiac, 3 different episodes on the Zodiac, all from the same case breaking crew, and stuff that you've not heard anywhere else before. You'll see all the naysayers, but the thing is they can't account for this guy like these guys have, because they're professionals, you know?
Right. And that's what those guys are doing. They're doing those things is great. I mean, you know what, a couple of years ago, they was able to nab the Golden State Killer.
That's right.
You know, so it's amazing what they're able to do. Even like the 23andMe and the ancestry things now are either catching some people, because back then they collected DNA and obviously they didn't know what to do with it. But I read there was a story, and I forget which one because I've listened to so many podcasts, but basically there was this kid, I would say maybe in his 20s, you know, he done it, it sent in the DNA. Well, they was able to match that to an unsolved homicide. It was like, you know, years prior. Obviously the kid couldn't have done it because I don't even think he was born at the time, but it was his father who had never gotten caught for it. So obviously they come to this kid, they know, okay, well, who's members of your family, who's still living? They go find his father, and his father committed his crime like years and years before that. So it's crazy. As that old saying, man, everything you do in the dark, it comes to light at some point in time. You know, they're going to get you at some point in time.
It's so true. It's so true.
Well, man, I'll go ahead and tell you, Pete, I've had a blast on this show. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. You've got an excellent story, and I know you've got more stories. And like I said, if you're more than willing to come back on, we'll definitely be glad to have you for sure. I would like to ask people, you know, when I close out, if you had, because I know you, like you said, you've come back, you've had some issues with some PTSD, you're managed to be able to one that's kind of work through that. And, you know, some people can, others are not so lucky. Knowing all that now, would you do what you've done over again? Would you travel the same path? Would you do it the same, but a little differently? Or would you just go in an entirely different direction altogether? And that's what we'll close with.
Yeah, man, I'm good with the path. You know, if I went back and did it again, maybe it'd be smoother, but you can't guarantee you go to the same place. I am very fortunate in terms of my military experience. There's really nobody else like me in the history of the military, because I got to just do these things in a way that nobody else does. And I often hear pundits and high-ranking people talk, but thing is they don't have the sauce that I have. I've got more notches on my belt. It's got more patrols than they do. And so I love having these guys on that are high level people. I'm going to have one on Wednesday, Dr. Lanny Cass. She worked for Mike Mullen, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And she and I can talk in a way where we recognize each other's jujitsu and how good it is, because, you know, you don't get to where we are without that experience. And so I can't change that. I can't change. All I can do now is try to relay these stories for some kid. And amazingly, look, this is incredible. In terms of the spy stuff, I have younger people that are like, I'm going to join the military, and I found your channel, and I can't get enough of these spy episodes because I'm trying to think about doing this, and I don't understand what I'm getting into. And I don't give away classified secrets, but I do talk about this stuff in a way that allows people to have a better understanding of it. And it's the same thing with the modern combat stuff. Like, how do we do this stuff better? Because how we're doing it, it doesn't work. And we're desperate to do it better. But we keep going back to the same thing. I was making fun of someone the other day, like they pull out the Marine handbook and go, bellow wood. Now that's how you fight. But that's not how people fight anymore. I mean, look at the Russians right now getting their asses handed to them because they're trying to fight in an old style that's not tenable anymore. So
yeah, they've lost a ton of guys over there, man.
Oh my gosh. And equipment, all that material, you can bring new conscripts in, but they're not going to be a higher quality of a service member, right? And all of your equipment is getting smashed to pieces, right? One of the worst places to be in a combat these days is inside a tank. You don't just get to go smashing through a town and blowing crap up. No. You're going to get hit by some dude in the field who's like picked up a rocket. He's going to launch it at you.
Yeah, this ain't Marvin Heemeyer here. Well, I think that was the guy that put himself in a tank and just went and tore the whole damn town up down there.
Yeah,
he was a welder too. He welded himself in the tank and just went and tore the whole damn town apart.
Yeah. Welders.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, I've had a blast, like I said, man, and you're welcome back anytime. And, you know, you're a fantastic guest, and I hope everybody gets a little something out of this. You know, you get some information. Go follow your channel. Tell us again one more time what that name is, and we're also going to link it to our show notes.
Just go to YouTube, type in Pete A. Turner or Break It Down Show. You should see it come up. Pete A. Turner will get you there. And yeah, just follow it there. That's the live stuff. The podcast is called The Break It Down Show. But if you listen on YouTube, you'll get the freshest things. 1,300 episodes, by the way.
13 makes my 40 something or 30, 39 something there. Paled in comparison. Well, I tell you what, man, like I said, we've had a blast, and you're welcome back anytime, folks. I am Hollywood Wade. That was Pete Turner. And unfortunately, we are out of time. Tune in here next week for an all new episode of Crime and Entertainment. Pete, we appreciate it, my friend.